We've got Jeffro on line 2. Jeffro, how hot is it out your way?
Hotter than Satan's nutsack.
That bad, huh?
I opened the front door and my shadow stayed inside. Hell, the dog's under the porch, the chickens are standing in the water bowl, and whatever's in that mailbox can be damned to hell. It's probably bills anyways.
So you're staying put?
House catches fire, I'll think about it. Hell, it might cool the place off.
Now, growing up, meatloaf was about 3 pounds of ground beef cooked in the oven until it qualified as a piece of lumber. Now, my mom would cook it until it was so dry that it would absorb floodwater. Then she would paint some ketchup on top of it, like she was a landlord trying to cover up some black mold in a closet. And of course, you know, we're gonna eat it because we're 8, unemployed, and we ain't got nowhere else to go. So today, I'm gonna make some smoked jalapeno cheddar meatloaf. Because being an adult is mostly just fixing the shit that your parents ruined. Hey, I'm Joe, this is Fork and Nimbers, the barbecue channel that keeps turning grocery receipts into difficult conversations with my wife. Now, a few videos back, I made some brisket, and it was expensive, so much so that I had to put it on Klarna in 4 easy payments. And we ate that shit in one night, which means I'm technically making payments on a turd. So I was like, you know what, let's make something more affordable. Something that you can feed a crowd and have some leftovers. And doesn't require me to disclose my annual income. And that led me down the history of meatloaf, which is just people trying to find creative ways to take meat and feed more mouths. And then of course I added jalapenos, sharp cheddar, bourbon glaze, and some other unnecessary steps because I apparently didn't learn a damn thing. Now the full recipe is over on my website. Deeper historical dive is over on Patreon. Now let's take meatloaf to a whole nother level. Alrighty, so the first thing you're gonna wanna do is take some blocks of cheese. We're gonna use extra sharp cheddar. Extra sharp cheddar is great for trying to stuff it into a meatloaf because, you know, it doesn't melt as quickly. You know, it's a little bit less moisture content. But cut it in logs like this. I usually use probably 1.5 blocks of cheese, so 8 ounces. So you're about 12 ounces usually. This is more than we'll probably need, but I like to cut it in logs like this, and then we're gonna throw it in the freezer. I didn't cut this on camera because it would fucking melt. It's already melting and it's already frozen. It's melting out here, it's hot. It's too hot. I am mentally checked out of summer. After this video, me, the wife, and the girls are gonna sit in the air conditioning, make a charcuterie board, and watch fucking scary movies because we're mentally in fall. Look at that ice melting. So first thing we're gonna do is make our onion mixture. Turn that real low because we don't want to saute them. So I made that brisket a couple videos ago. Got some fat trimmings. That's what we're gonna use here. Only take you about a tablespoon. Toss it right there. One thing I hate in the meatloaf is when people use raw ingredients. I just don't like the crunchy effect that it has. So we're gonna take 1 large onion, toss it in there. Save one of these because we're just gonna put this mixture right back in it. Just sweat these down till you just get a little bit of color. You don't want too much color because we're not trying to saute them, but we're trying to make them soft so you don't bite into a raw onion. Now, you know, people's been chopping up meat and mixing it with shit for centuries. And a lot of people actually think that the Romans invented meatloaf because a lot of their dishes make use of minced meat. They even got this ancient Roman cookbook called the Apicius. And inside of it, a lot of their dishes was using minced meat. Things like meat pudding, croquettes, things that could loosely be translated into a meatloaf, but they weren't what we recognize as a meatloaf today. Now, what likely happens with meatloaf is that versions of it kind of pop up all over the place because of a few practical reasons that everyone shares. You know, cutting up tough pieces of meat makes it more edible. You also get the opportunity to use leftovers or scraps of meat that you might not use before. You might throw away or give to the dog. And it also lets you take a little bit of meat and stretch it into a much bigger family meal. Now this will take about 10 minutes. Also, if you're noticing a pretty hard left turn with the music in this video, there's a reason. This past week I lost my aunt, which was my mom's sister, and I lost my mom in high school when I was a sophomore. Since then, we kind of lost contact with them. You know, we meet up every now and then for holidays and stuff, but she essentially helped raise us for a good part of her life. I remember staying with them one summer, and you know, they were very old school. I'm talking about wooden outhouse kind of shit. Like, we bathed in a creek, you know what I'm saying? Or creek, wherever you from. I remember her holding me on the dam. And I'm thinking like, I'm about to slide into this fucking water. You know, I don't know. She's like, you're fine, you're fine. I'm like, I'm gonna die. I was fucking certain of it. And her name was Marina. But like I was saying, Marina and them was very old school. We stayed with them over the summer. You know, because it's so hot, I'm reminded of this, but they're upstairs in their house. Hell, they didn't have electricity. I remember a motherfucker walking around with a lantern. Like, what in the hell century are we in? With nothing, no electricity or nothing. Like, what? You know, now that she's passed, it kind of brings up a little bit of all of that stuff with, you know, losing my mom. About the music, I'm using music that reminds me of my mom and, you know, Marina. That's why you're hearing Shania Twain and Toby Keith and stuff, which I do love all those artists, but I'm just pissed that I couldn't license some Alan Jackson. They thought Alan Jackson was the sexiest man alive. So these have been cooking down for about 8 to 10 minutes. I think the texture we're wanting on them. You don't want them too soft. I don't want to cook them down like a French onion soup or something, but you don't want them crunchy anymore. Now towards the end, I'll crank the temp up a little bit just to get some browning effect on it. And then at the end here, what we'll do is also take some garlic. Don't have that temperature too high when you throw this garlic in, although there's a lot of moisture left on the onion that it won't burn likely, but you can burn some onion. Now this is about 4 garlic cloves. Toss that in there. Set that to the side. And then you're just gonna cook that down for about a minute or two, get that fragrant. Towards the end here, you can go ahead and cut off the heat because the residual heat will be enough to cook it down. Hey, we looking good. You know, my mom and them, they did like some Craig Morgan. You know, we was some hillbillies. Well, hell, I'm still a hillbilly. I just live in the suburbs now. My younger child husband, Cynthia Anna. You know, somebody else I wish I could have licensed their music was Keith Whitley. That's the man right there, Keith Whitley. So what we need to do is put this in a container without spilling it. Now what you want to do with this is put it in the freezer. That's what we're going to do. Don't put that lid on there. But I'm going to put it in the freezer because we want everything cold when we go to use it. So freezer is what we got. Now we're going to make something called a panade. And I've got a little cheat code right here to start off with. We're going to take about 1/4 of a cup to 1/2 of a cup of chicken stock or beef stock. It's up to you. We're using beef stock. Pour it in this pan here, and then we're gonna take some gelatin. It's unflavored gelatin, of course, but what this is gonna do is it's gonna mimic that collagen breakdown that you get from slow cooking something like a brisket. It's just gonna be extra insurance that this thing is extra juicy. I recommend doing this for your meatloaves. I'm gonna set got no fucking watch on. I'm gonna set a 5-minute timer. After 5 minutes, you'll come back, and this is gonna look like Jello pretty much. So yeah, after about 5 minutes, you should have something that looks like a gelatin or Jello type thing. We're gonna put it on low, low, low. We don't want it very hot, because all we wanna do is dissolve it. And it's almost hot enough out here to do that on its own. Get us a pan here, or not a pan, a bowl. Now, while this heats up, I'll tell you a little more history. Now, the most clearly documented example of an American meatloaf comes in 1987 when a lady named Eliza Leslie. She writes a cookbook called Miss Leslie's New Cookery Cookbook. And she doesn't really make a meatloaf, she makes something called a veal loaf. And what she does is obviously uses veal, some fatty ham, some breadcrumbs, some seasonings, lemon rind, you know, just a bunch of shit. She bakes it, serves it with gravy. And this just goes to show you the earliest American meatloaves were not, you know, something that was really bland and boring. They were actually putting some ingredients in this damn thing. Not just oatmeal like my mama. But more importantly, what it shows is that you can take meat from yesterday and turn it into a completely new meal today. Then in 1876, there's a Minnesota newspaper that actually is gonna publish a recipe called meatloaf. And what they say to do is take whatever cold meat you have, mix it with onion, eggs, and a bread that's been soaked in milk, and you can serve it with tea or breakfast. So yeah, meatloaf used to be a breakfast food, which sounds crazy to us, but if you think about it, it's kind of doing the same thing that hash has been doing. You take meat and you make a new meal out of it today. Now this just need a little bit of encouragement here. So what this is called is blooming the gelatin. So you hydrate it, and then that's what makes it kind of swell up, become like a gelatin. And then you heat it up and it dissolves super fine. Now what we need to do is, that's good. We don't want it to get warm. pour it in here. Again, if you feel like you need a little bit more stock, that's fine. You know, just add it early on. I do about a 1/4 cup to a 1/2 cup. Next, we want to take some buttermilk. This is about a 1/2 cup. Actually, it's an exact 1/2 cup of buttermilk. Well, let me mix this up first. Next, we're going to take 4 ounces of bread, white bread, just whatever cheap ass bread you can find works. And you want to take the crust off like you do for your kid because they fucking cry about it. Now, instead of getting my hands dirty just yet, take this and get it hydrated. You want every piece to get a little bit of mixture on it, or a little bit of that liquid on it. Because we're gonna let this rest for about 5 to 10 minutes. And if you realize like, hey, I don't got enough liquid in here, pour a little bit of buttermilk, a little bit more buttermilk. But once all those pieces get wet, it'll break down pretty easily. You know, my mama didn't use a panade, she used the breadcrumbs, or oatmeal actually. She didn't use breadcrumbs. She used oatmeal, which made it dry as a son of a bitch. But oatmeal's cheap. So let this set for about 5 or 10 minutes and we're gonna come through and break it down into a paste. You can use a fork to break this down if you want. I just like having a glove because I can feel all of the pieces of bread that need broken. Now, you got little hard clumps like that, just break them down. Squeeze the shit out of it. Now, I've seen other people make this and it's like a lot runnier paste. I like something more like this because I find that it kind of helps keep shape on the meatloaf. Too much liquid will cause there to be too much moisture. But you can, if you want, you can blend this up if you want a super fine panade. But this will do the job. And I'm gonna place this in the refrigerator or freezer because we're gonna be using it, you know, pretty soon, so. All right, so next we're gonna be making the meat mixture. And that starts with adding your cooked onions back in. Get those in there. Next, what you wanna add is your prepared panade. Mix that in there. Next up, we got to do some eggs. This is going to help also keep it together. Very important ingredient. Toss it. Oh, 1 big shell. Gather. Now to give it a little bit more moisture, but also more, you know, barbecue palate, we're going to go with some W sauce. I'll have all of the measurements on my website. Next up, a little bit more moisture, but also knocking 2 birds out with 1 stone. We're gonna do some soy sauce. Next up, I like Dijon mustard. We're gonna add some of that. It adds a little bit of sharpness to it, just a little tang. Next, for some color, a little bit more additional flavor, we're gonna go with some smoked paprika. But hell, regular paprika is mostly for color, I'm gonna be honest with you. Some jalapeños. Now, what I did with these roasted jalapeños is yesterday, I roasted them, put them in a bag, let them hydrate, took the skins off, and I chopped them up finely. I personally like leaving the seeds in them. I like the spice, and I use about 5 to 6 jalapeños for that. I also like to use ancho chili powder. Now, this does give it a little bit darker color, but also a mild heat, not too much, but it does give it some spice. Then, you know, a little bit more sharp bite, some pepper. I like coarse black pepper. And then I use a 1.5 tablespoons of fine sea salt. Now you gotta think, we've got a lot here. It might seem like it's overly salty, but it's not. Now, what I like to do is take a whisk, and a whisk will let me break this up before I add the meat to it. You can also use the whisk to kind of break up any bigger pieces of bread that you still got, but all right. Now we get to the fun part, which is adding the meat. So we've got 3 pounds of meat here. We're using 2 pounds of beef. Do 80-20. 80-20 is gonna give you the best fat to meat ratio. Doesn't draw up and lose too much moisture, and doesn't get too dry. And then 1 pound of ground pork, obviously. And then we'll get the mixing. Now, a lot of your earliest meatloaf recipes, we're having people, you know, cut up meat by hand, which took a lot of time and effort, right? Like you're having to fucking mince meat with a cleaver or something. You know, a lot of those early recipes weren't using raw meat, so it was a little bit easier, but you know, it still took a lot of time nonetheless. Then in 1897, there's a company out of Connecticut called Landers, Frary and Clark, and they start selling a product called the Universal Food Chopper. And it's like one of these cast iron things that you clamp to the side of your table. You throw shit in it, you know, meat, vegetables, everything. And now the grinder didn't invent meatloaf. You know, people had already been making meatloaf for decades. But what it did do is it made the process a whole hell of a lot easier. Now families would deliberately go out and buy meat and cut it up and grind it and make meatloaf. Similar to how we do today, right? Now what I'm trying to do here is just fold it in, almost like you would a dough. That's how I find it works the best. Don't go in there squeezing it too much, especially with it as hot as it is out here. I'm trying to just get everything incorporated. And then we'll move to the next step here real quick. Now we have to shape the meatloaf. So what I do is I take me a 9x5 meatloaf pan and I put some plastic wrap down inside of it because that's gonna help remove it from the pan later on. And just start taking your mixture and putting it down in there. We got a little bit smaller pan here, and if it ain't too hot out here, it'll work. It'll flatten it. There we go, perfect. All right, now we can get the cheese. Now remember, we froze this, and you wanna give it a pretty good amount of space away from the wall. That'll help kind of keep it from leaking out. I mean, it's damn near impossible to stop this from leaking out, but that's your best chance. Press it down in there. You want to layer them side by side. And then we'll just keep doing that, probably for another couple layers. Make sure you do that here and there, here and there. Now around the same time as the universal food chopper, you start to see this boom in cooking schools and cookbooks. And they're making recipes way more exact, right? So instead of saying, hey, use whatever meat you got, now they're saying use very specific types of meat and certain types of like mixtures and ratios, cooking times and cooking temperatures and different seasonings and stuff. So just way more precise. And they even have instructions for particular pans. One really great example of this is the Boston Cooking School cookbook. And they had a veal loaf recipe that was very specific. Use, veal and salt pork and breadcrumbs, very specific measurements and cooking times and everything. And one important detail is it said to put it into a bread pan and bake it. Now your earlier meatloaves, they could be shaped by hand. People use molds. They could chill them and serve them cold. So yeah, when they come out with the recipe that says to use, the bread pan, that gives meatloaf that recognizable rectangular shape that we all know today. Now, this meat mixture here is enough for about 1.5 of these. Now, I have that smaller pan over there, and that's what I usually do is bake one bigger one smaller one. I try not to overfill this pan, but honestly what I usually do with the leftover is my girls love meatballs. So I'll make meatball subs or spaghetti and meatballs, so just do what you will with it. You want to make sure that you press because if not, you'll end up with cracks in the top of it. The top being the bottom right now. I kind of use this wrap here to help round out the edges. Pressing those corners there. Let's put this in the freezer and then I'll see you in about 30 minutes to an hour when we take this thing out. Now I'm not drinking bourbon today, but we're gonna be using some bourbon in the glaze. So about 1/4 cup of bourbon. This is E.H. Colonel Taylor. Use whatever cheap shit you want, whatever, it don't matter. You wanna bring this to just a slight simmer. We don't wanna cook too much of it down because it'll be gone in a hurry if you ain't careful. You look over and your fucking bourbon is gone. Now I'm gonna turn it off while I start adding everything else. Now, my mom would just slather ketchup on this thing and we'd call it a day. But what this has got in it is it's got some ketchup in it. It's also got some packed brown sugar, some molasses, some apple cider vinegar, some Dijon mustard, and some hot sauce. And I'll put all of the ratios and the ingredients and everything in my recipe. Now when I first made this, I wanted to make it with sorghum. Anybody in Kentucky knows what that is, but I got the thing, I was like, man, people ain't gonna be able to find this shit outside of Kentucky. Maybe you would, but hell, it's hard to find sorghum sometimes around here. Now this won't take long. I'll let it reduce down to it's about half, or whatever thickness you like. Now remember, it does get thicker as it sets here and cools off, so don't reduce it way, way, way down, not realizing it's going to actually thicken up quite a bit. Turn the heat off, throw you in about a tablespoon of butter. What that's gonna do is it's gonna really balance out the acidity, the spiciness, but more importantly, it's gonna help emulsify it. I think it kind of balances it out perfectly. And you wanna put cold butter in there right at the end, and that'll melt. You'll get like that nice glossy finish on it, and then you'll just need to set this aside, and while you're cooking, we'll talk about how we use it later. Delicious. This next step's pretty simple. It's been sitting in the freezer for about, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour. So now it's time to season it and take it out of this mold. Now, this bottom part's easier to season if you just do it now. I like to go heavy on the pepper, and pepper is all we're gonna be using. We're keeping it very simple today. Take this piece of butcher paper here. I've cut it to fit this about perfectly. Now what that's gonna do is when I set that over onto this rack, it's gonna keep that meatloaf from sticking to that wire rack. Damn, it looks good. Perfect. All right, now, let's take this off here, and then we're gonna do some plaster work. Not that it really needs it. So what we need to do is any cracks, drywall knife, truly a bench scraper, but just make sure you get any of those out. Use your finger too. It helps a lot. Just don't put too many divots into it. And don't sweat onto the fucking meatloaf. Look at there. All right, I think we're done. Fuck. Now, pepper. We're gonna do a good little coating all around. We'll start on top. I like going heavy. Give me a nice little bark on there. Oh yeah. Right now what I'm gonna do is toss this in the freezer, let it come down in temperature quite a bit. So what that does is allows that cheese to stay cold. I wanna kind of prolong the melting of it as long as possible because I want the meat to kind of set as best as possible. Whew, it's hot. It's hotter than Satan's nutsack out here. Damn, ice is gone. Now today we're gonna be using the Weber Smoky Mountain to make this meatloaf. Now you can use whatever smoker you want, it doesn't matter, but I will stress to you that lower temperature does do better for meatloaf that's stuffed with cheese. When you run a higher temperature around 285, 300, what's gonna happen is that meat contracts really fast and the cheese will melt and then it'll start squeezing it out of the meatloaf. I've had some luck at higher temperatures, but the lower temperatures I find work better. Now if you're using a Weber Smoky Mountain, what I like to do to keep it low temperature is I'll take all the bottom vents, close them except one. I'll leave it open about 1/4 inch because mine leaks. Then I'll fill the bottom up about halfway with charcoal, unlit. You know, enough to give you a few hours of cooking. You don't need to fill the bottom up completely. Then take you about 5 to 8 charcoal briquettes, light it, put it right in the center of that. We're using the minion method. Then take you apple wood or cherry wood, about 3 to 4 chunks of it, toss it on top of that fire. Then go ahead, put your cooking chamber back on. And then we're gonna be using water today because it's so damn hot out here. And that's my best shot at keeping the temperature on this Weber Smoky Mountain low. So I like to fill it up about halfway with water. Then go ahead, put your smoker back together and watch that temperature slowly rise to 225. Once it gets there, you wanna go ahead and put you an aluminum pan underneath of your meatloaf and then put your meatloaf on the top rack. I like to use a wire rack because otherwise the meatloaf will stick to the grate and it's just harder to get off. So use a wire rack, set it on top there, and we're gonna let it cook for a few hours. Make sure that that top vent is open about halfway. Again, mine leaks, so I try to cut off as much oxygen as possible to keep the temperature low enough. And while that thing smokes, let's talk a little bit of history. So by the early 1900s, meatloaf was already an established American dish. During World War I, you're gonna have the United States asking its citizens to be more conservative, you know, don't waste so much damn food. Because we have soldiers that are overseas as well as American allies and we need to be able to ship them supplies. Now there's a conservation cookbook in 1918 called The Foods That Will Win the War and How to Cook Them. And what it recommended doing was taking leftovers and combining it with fresh meat and making things like meatloaf. Now the important note here is that the war didn't create this way of cooking. I mean, people had been taking leftover meat and making things like meatloaf for decades. What it changed is how this thriftiness was presented now, right? Because before the war, stretching meat just meant that you were trying to save money and that, you know, you were avoiding waste. But now that exact same behavior can be looked at as patriotic. And then comes the Great Depression. And you'll hear a lot of people say the Great Depression created meatloaf, but it's wrong, it didn't do that. What the Great Depression did do though is it took what meatloaf was already really good at and it made it that much more important. Because you could take a relatively small amount of meat and mix it with a bunch of shit, rice, oatmeal, vegetables, scraps, and then you would have a complete meal for your family. In 1933, there's going to be a home economics book that's published, and it's called Junior Home Economics Food. And it was using meatloaf in order to teach kids how to make food that was more affordable. And their version would use things like rice and tomato, and it would recommend buying more economical cuts like the chuck or the neck meat. And a fucking chuck ain't that cheap. anymore. But that really changes how you look at the word filler, because today if you hear the word filler in your meat, you're like, hold up, I'm getting fucked somehow. You know, back then historically, extending the meat and prolonging it and getting the most use out of it was really the entire purpose. It wasn't about creating the most purest possible meatloaf out of expensive meat, right? It was about taking an expensive cut and being wise and smart with it, and wasting as little as possible, and making sure that everyone at the table had something to eat. Now, once your meatloaf reaches 120 degrees internal Fahrenheit, let's go ahead and hit it with some glaze. Now, during World War II, the government is going to encourage citizens to eat less meat so that there'd be more supplies for our troops and the Allies, right? And they would do this through a campaign called Share the Meat. In 1942, the Office of War Information is actually going to demonstrate their own baked bean loaf. And they'd make it with mashed beans, eggs, breadcrumbs, celery, and seasoning. But the best part about it is the government said, this shit's bland. I ain't gonna lie to you, it's bland. So they would actually encourage to eat it with something else that had more flavor, like a pickle or an onion or something. Like, that's crazy. And it is funny, but it does go to show you how flexible meatloaf really is. I mean, it don't even need to have fucking meat in it. As long as something could be bound together, shaped, browned, sliced, and covered in sauce, people understood what it was supposed to be. Kind of like people who eat Impossible burgers. They know what it's supposed to be, but it ain't that. Now your meatloaf, when it hits around 140, let's go ahead and glaze it again, because we want it to really set on there nicely. Now, after World War II, meatloaf really adapted to supermarkets, frozen meals, canned foods, and, you know, just overall convenience cooking. And it worked perfectly because meatloaf could be cooked in batches, sliced evenly, frozen, reheated, served with potatoes and vegetables. And that definitely made it useful at home, but also diners, cafeterias, schools, hospitals, and frozen dinners. And there is something that's a little ironic about that, because in the 1800s, families were using meatloaf to turn their leftovers into, you know, home-cooked meals. But by the mid-1900s, companies could manufacture meatloaf by the thousands, and then they could turn around and sell it to families as home-style meals. And that really explains why so many people look at meatloaf differently. You know, for some people, it means mashed potatoes, macaroni and cheese, grandmamas and mamas cooking, right? And then for someone else, it's a gray piece of meat in a school cafeteria or at a hospital, you know, served with some sad-ass gravy. And both reputations really come from the same thing that helped meatloaf survive. That meatloaf could become any fucking thing. The grinder changed it, the loaf changed it, hard times changed it, and frozen dinners changed it. And now we're putting it in a smoker. And that's not really going against the history of meatloaf. Hell, it is the history of meatloaf. It's always changing.
Let's go, girls.
Now, once your meatloaf reaches about 155 or so, we can go ahead and remove it from the smoker, take it inside, let it rest, and then we'll serve it. Now, this thing turned out amazing. I've let it rest for a little bit because I don't want the cheese to just ooze out completely when I cut this open. Oh yeah, look at that cheese. It turned out phenomenal. I'm so excited to try this. Look at that. Oh man. Let's get us a bite of that bark with the cheese there. Hey, look. It's got spice, it's got the heat, it's got sweet, it's got acidity. There's not a note that this thing doesn't hit on. Like, it is absolutely amazing. Look at that cheese just oozes out. Look, see? So look, it's been a long ass day. It's been a real long week too. And I'm pretty much mentally checked the fuck out for the summer. And it doesn't help that it's hot enough to fry an egg on the sidewalk outside. I've never been so ready for fall. And just as a quick idea of how hot it is out here and how much I sweated, take a look at this gross ass clip right here. After one day of filming, let's see.
I don't want to see.
All right, hold on.
Oh, gross.
Take your ass and subscribe. But I'm gonna head inside, spend some time with my family, make a charcuterie board, watch a scary movie in the fucking air conditioning. And if you wanna ruin every other meatloaf that your family will ever eat, make this one for them. And like a belly button, I'm outie. Also put an aluminum pan underneath of the, what am I saying? My editor, also not a big fan of the fan. fucks with the audio. But I'm gonna tell you what, I would die. I would die. Hold up, wait a minute. Where's my fucking garlic? Why did I lose everything? Where did I put that? I know I just had it. Right here. Wow. Cut the camera.